And we thank everyone for being with us. We thank you for your love and your support. And we know that you are a blessing to us and to everyone whom you meet. This morning I wanted to kind of follow on a little bit of some of the ideas we talked about last week, which was speaking about your good, naming your good, declaring your good, and talking about it, and not being so darn quiet. As Emma Curtis Hopkins would say, we remain completely silent when it comes to matters of our good. And there's an inconsistency in what we say and what we do. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said what people do, what people say, and what people say they do are three entirely different things. And I always thought that was a great observation on human nature. And of course that's true of all of us. We say one thing, we do another, and then we tell a different story entirely. And that's why the title of the talk this morning is Your Head, Your Heart, or Your Feet. Which do you follow? Which do you follow? And it's kind of, kind of a quirk of our human experience, our human existence. We didn't create the rules. We kind of arrived here. We've been trying to figure them out since we got here. But we are really interesting creatures. If you look at us from the outside, from what you can see physically, it appears that we're one. We're one person. We have a body, we have head, we have hands, we have feet, we have kind of all the necessary requirements of being a human being. We assume that, inside the physical that we could see, that there's some kind of a consciousness, a brain, a mind in operation. And from all outward appearances, it would seem that there's a unity there. There's one. But from the inside, it seems as if we are different people at times. That there are different parts of us acting independently as if they were, in fact, different people. That's why I think the movies about multiple personalities, I think was it Sylvia, something like that was the first one. Sybil, that's it. Sybil was the first one years ago, first popular movie that I remember about multiple personalities. And we're kind of fascinated by this whole idea that there could be one person who at times awakens with one personality, and then at another time a different personality will emerge through. And I think the reason it fascinates us so much is that we can all relate to that. We can say, at times it seems like there's different people in here. My head wants to go one direction, my heart wants to go to another direction, my feet are just walking along all by themselves, doing their own thing. My body, my actions is what I mean by the feet, are engaged in something else entirely. And how do we kind of sort through that and get it all together, think about it. As humans, we know so little about consciousness. In the Western world, it was only around 1600s that we even started to consider what thinking was. Remember Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And of course the area is who is the one thinking? What is the one thinking? Is the thought the person, or is the thought a function of the person? But we have these thoughts. We learn things. Think of all the things that you learned as a kid in school. We have these thoughts. We know so much information, and it seems like it's gone from us. We can't remember things at times. We can't recall all the things that we learned. We know that we know the information. It's right there, almost on the tip of our tongue. We can just about recall that little bit of whatever it is that we're looking for, and we know that we knew it. We know that we had it. I know that I knew how to do this. I know that I knew how to answer that question. And we search and we search and we search. And where are we searching? Somewhere inside of ourselves. Where is the information? Somewhere inside of ourselves. It's somewhere in there, And then it comes back to us. Boom! As Ernest Holmes would say, it's like our thoughts took leave of us, and then they came back to us as a memory. But while they were gone, they were busy. They were doing things, setting things in motion for us. So where did the thoughts go, and who was it that remembered, and who was it that couldn't remember? And yet, we're told that For example, under hypnosis, we're able to recall the things that consciously we can't remember, that there's a part of us that functions subliminally, I guess is the best way to put it, below our level of consciousness, but it is aware, and it is always aware. And even when people are under anesthesia, even when their body is completely numb and it seems like their consciousness, their conscious mind is completely inactive, we're told that people are aware of what's going on around them in the operating room and can be induced to recall the conversations that the doctors and the surgical staff were having in the operating room. So we have this fascinating complex being that we are, that we're just constantly trying to figure out as we go through this life. And it seems like there's different compartments in our consciousness. It seems like there's an intellect, there's an ego, there are emotions, there are actions, there are all these different components. And at times they all want to go in different directions. And one of my teachers once defined peace as being when our head and our heart and our feet were all moving in the same direction. That what we think, what we believe, what we feel, and what we do are all the same. In other words, the conflict is gone from within us. We can struggle against ourselves. I don't know how many other species on earth can possibly do that, but we can struggle against ourselves. And yet peace is when that struggle is gone, when we're completely aligned. So there are times when we want to get started, when we have named our good, as we talked about last week. We recognize that there's a good in the universe that we ought to have. And we might call it, for example, health. And we recognize that health exists. We recognize that the intelligence that created these bodies has not left it alone. Intellectually, we might understand those things. But how do we move? How do we move, if you will, to a greater experience of health? And what we talked about last week is we can start by paying attention to what we're saying, what we're paying attention to. Life is a matter of intention and attention. What is it that you want to have happen now? And what is it that you're paying attention to? So the first disconnect that we have, we talked about last week, is that we have one intention, but our attention is completely in the opposite. Excuse me. So we may say that our desire is for perfect health, and yet our words are about our aches and pains and our ailments and diseases and all of those things. We may say that our intention is for supply, to experience enough and plenty, to go through this life, to be able to do the things that we came here to do. And yet our attention might be on the stock market and the declines and how tough the economy is and all those kind of things. And then we have our actions, What are our actions doing? If we say one thing and we're acting it in a totally different way. And where are our feelings if we say one thing and we're feeling a totally different way? So it's kind of like we can be disjointed, and the only way that we can succeed is to get everything to come into alignment, to get everything to come together. So, if you will, all of those different people that are inside of us are all on the same page at the same time. So we need to understand a little bit about psychologically how we're put together and how we work, and then we need to tie it together spiritually, how all that comes together. So Dr. Holmes called science of mind spiritual psychology. And we're understanding mind. We're understanding what mind is. We're understanding how mind works. We're understanding what thoughts are. We're understanding what thinking is, which is kind of a great difference in what we learned in school. Most of us, when we went to school, we learned how to memorize things. We learned how to remember what was going to be on the test long enough to take the test. And then once we took the test, we never had to worry about it again, unless we were going to be tested on the same subject matter again, in which case we had to go back and review. But for most of us, school was a process of kind of remembering things, learning how to put different things that we remembered together, perhaps, and process them. But largely it was about acquiring data and being able to recall the data or find the data when we needed it. And that's not at all what Dr. Holmes is talking about. He's learning what thinking is. What is it that acquires the data? What is it that's able to read? What is it that's able to write? What is it that is able to process and analyze? So we need to look at these things. So one thing that we want to keep in mind is that there's different modes that we go through as we're learning, and they kind of follow the head and the heart and the feet. There's kind of a wheel of learning that we go through. That when I got involved in adult learning as a trainer, I came to recognize that there are steps that we have to go through, and you can consider them to be in a circle because we go through them and we go through them and we go through them. And the interesting part is that each of us as a human being might enter that wheel at a different step. Some of us want to enter at our head. Some of us want to enter at our heart. Some of us want to enter at our feet with our actions. And the other fascinating thing is that each one of us, if we have a preferred mode of head or heart or actions, we may not use the same mode all the time. There may be times when we want to just jump in and start doing something. There may be a time when we want to stop and think about it. And there may be a time when we want to let our feelings dictate to us where to go. So if you consider the wheel, a simple explanation is one starting point is the intellect, is kind of new information. So we kind of get this information and we think about it. We think, oh wow, isn't that neat? Isn't that good? There's good for me there, and I ought to have it. The ego might be involved and say, and I deserve it too because I'm good enough and smart enough. But there's a desire that kind of comes from the intellectual level. And it's important to note that desire is the starting point of achievement, as Napoleon Hill told us. So there's this desire, there's this new information that comes in, and we kind of get excited about it. And then what we do is we go through a process of seeing how does it fit? How does it relate? How does this new piece of information fit and relate to old pieces of information? Other things that we have experienced, other things that we have known. How does it relate to other people's experience? How does it all kind of connect? And from there we might move into action. Now that we have an idea of what it is, we have an idea of how it relates to everything that we've known in the past. Now we're going to jump in. Now we're going to try to do it, And of course what happens is we jump in, we try to do it, we find out it's not anything like we thought it was going to be, The thing about learning a new skill like driving a car, you might ask all your friends about how a car works, and they tell you, oh, it's easy, You step on one pedal, it goes, step on the other pedal, it stops, and you just kind of turn the wheel from side to side, and there's a lever that you move to go forward or backward. That's it. Everything else is a piece of cake. And then you get in there and you find out, whoa, it doesn't quite work that well, that easy, It seems to be going when I didn't want it to go. It seems to be stopping much shorter than I expected it. When I turn the wheel from side to side, it doesn't quite take the corners the way it does when other people are driving. And what's happening is we're doing, and while we're doing, we're getting feedback. So while we're doing, we're learning. We may not like it because none of us likes to make mistakes, but the mistakes are in fact a necessary part of the learning experience. They are a valid part of the learning experience. Just as valid as doing something right and getting that feedback, doing something not so right and getting feedback is also important, because that leads us to the next step, which is reflection. In reflection, we stop and think about, well, what just happened here? What was that all about? How did that work, And we kind of analyze it. We say, oh, I see. If I step on the gas too hard, the car jumps out from under me. If I stepped up on the brake too hard, it screeches to a halt. I see. If I turn the wheel too soon, I go up on the curb. If I turn the wheel too late, I go into the other lane. I see what's going on here. So from the reflection, you get new information, and then you go right back through the loop. You see, you start back and you go through the loop. So it's important to know that there are different kind of stages, and they kind of correlate, excuse me, with the head, with the hands, with the heart. And it's okay to start in different places at different times. It's okay. But eventually we have to get them all kind of linked up. Eventually we have to go through the phases. Eventually we have to get ourselves completely aligned so that we can experience the peace and we can experience the fullness of whatever the new experience is that we desire, whether it be health, whether it be prosperity, whether it be loving relationships, whether it be fulfilling activities and employment or service opportunities. We want to have the full experience. So another way to look at this, an example that we used to use when we were doing the workshops and kind of talking to people about this. Usually we talk to them about it in terms of team building. You know, that you're going to have people in the team who have different preferred modes, and they're all important at different times in the project. So if you can imagine a group of people come together and they're told that they're a team, and they're sat at a big round table, and on that table is a little model car, a plastic car, you know, the kind that comes with 8 zillion pieces, and you have to glue the pieces together and paint the car and put the decals on it and all those kind of things. And on the table is a plastic box that's still sealed. Is the box, with the plastic car in it, and still sealed in the wrapping paper, wrapping plastic, shrink wrap. And there's tubes of glue, and there's little bottles of paint, remember little tiny bottles of paint we used to paint the models with? And there's paint brushes and X-Acto knives and decals and water and sponges to put the decals on, and everything that you need to put a model together. You know, so you have a group of people. They're brought around the table. They're sitting there, and they're told you're a team, and what your objective is to put that model car together. And what would typically happen is somebody will reach out and grab the box, and they will grab the X-Acto knife, and they will cut the plastic off the box. They'll open the box up. They'll dump all the parts out, and they'll start putting things together. This is a person whose entry mode is at the doing level. This is a person who starts with their actions. They start with their feet. And it's a very valid mode for a lot of people. In fact, probably the vast majority of people in our society are like that. We are a society that glorifies busyness. And people who are busy are perceived to be doing something, even if it's wrong. But they're busy and they're doing something. And the idea there is well, you know, just go ahead and get started. Just jump in. Just start doing something, and you'll learn as you do. And the learning is in the doing. And if you just jump in here and you get started and you see what's going on, then if you're not doing it right, you can change it. And that's their outlook on life. So typically, when something new comes along, some people will just jump in because they think it's important to get started. Now, there are other people who will look at that and say, but, you know, you're going to get halfway through putting this model together and realize that you missed a step, or you put something in that you shouldn't have put in, or you can't get to something to paint it now that you should have painted it before, and you're going to have to do it all over again, and you may, in fact, completely ruin it. You know, so wouldn't it be better if there was some planning involved? So there's a group of people who are going to want to process, and they're going to say, hey, you know, I've put models together before, and what we need to do is we need to organize this. First thing we need to do is inventory. Make sure we've got all the parts and all of the paint and all of the glue and everything that we need. And then what we need to do is we need to, you know, just follow the instructions. And what we need to do is you know, cut the little pieces off the plastic tree that they're on, paint everything. Oh, what we'll do is you paint everything, all the red pieces, you paint all the blue pieces, you paint all the green pieces, and we'll get this thing organized and then we'll put it together. But let's not start until we have a plan, because if we start before we have a plan, we're liable to make a mistake. And of course the doers are going to say, listen, if I wait for you to have a plan, we're never going to get going. I'm just going to jump in here and start doing stuff. There's another group of people who are also kind of working with their heads, and they're going to say, well, do we have enough data to start? Do we really know enough about what we're doing to start? Do we really need to read the instructions all the way through and then come back and have a discussion about how we're going to do this? And look over here. It looks like there's a typographical error on line 27. And what they're trying to do is they're looking for more data. They're constantly needing more data before they can get going. And of course, again, the doers are going to say, listen, you're never going to have all the data that you need. We need to just get in here and jump in. And then there's a group of people who are represented by the feeling nature, by the emotions. They're trying to link everything together. They're trying to connect it, and they're trying to connect it with the people at the table and whatever the purpose of the workshop that they're at. And they're saying, gee, I wonder why we're doing this. Why do you think that they're having us put a model together? Isn't that interesting? Have you ever done that before? Oh, by the way, my name is Jim, and where do you come from? And these people are kind of connecting emotionally with everybody at the table and with what's going on. And for those people, it's really not as important that the model get put together as that everybody feels good, or everybody participates, or everybody is recognized or honored in the process, And I only say that because it's an example of our different approaches to things. And of course, the thing that we're approaching is our spiritual growth. The thing that we're approaching is the good that we ought to have. And you and I are all of those people at the table. You and I, at times, we will want to just jump right in and start doing something. At times, we won't be able to jump in and start doing something because our emotions are in the way. We might be afraid. Our head might be telling us that we need to do something, but our feet won't move because we have an emotional block. There's something in the way. At times we really want to understand. We want to know everything that there is to know before we get moving. And we need to look at those things in terms of our spiritual growth and see when it might be appropriate for each of the modes and what the limitations of the modes might be. Excuse me. And the first problem we have with the intellect when we want to understand everything is that some things are beyond understanding. One of the kind of fallacies of logic and reason is that logic and reason is infallible, if you will, or logic and reason is all that there is. Logic and reason tells us that anything that is self-affirming is subject to doubt. It may or it may not be true. So if I'm interviewing for a job with you and I tell you, listen, I've got all the qualifications that you require for this job, and you say to me, well, how do I know that? And I say, well, you can ask my wife. She'll vouch for me. And you might say, well, how do we know Lori's telling the truth? And I say, well, that's okay. I'll vouch for her. Well, we just come in a circle, which is basically you still have my word for it, and that's all that there is. And logic and reason, if you step back far enough from it, it is about the same way. Logic and reason says that things should make sense logically because logic and reason say that it should. And the question is, well, what about things that are beyond logic and reason? What about things that are before logic and reason? In other words, can everything that there is be experienced through the intellect? Or is there another way or ways of experiencing things? Another way or ways of processing information? So we have to understand that the experience of love and the experience of God that we're talking about is something that is before the intellect, beyond the intellect. The Upanishads say it is that which is beyond words, but from which words come. In other words, there's a consciousness that is there before the words are there. There's a consciousness that exists before the thought is there. And in the biblical terms, it tells us the I am, the I amness, undifferentiated being, I amness. And there is this I amness that the mystics tell us that we can experience You can refer to Richard Maurice Buck's book, Cosmic Consciousness. But if you read of the mystical experiences are ineffable. Right? They are beyond words. There are no words to describe them. The best we can do with our words, with our logic, with our reason, with our intellectual explanations, the best that we can do just doesn't get it. It's kind of like trying to explain to someone who has never had a piece of chocolate to intellectually get them to be able to fully comprehend what chocolate is like. And they can't. They have to have a piece of chocolate. There are some things that must be experienced that cannot be described through the intellect. So we have to understand that there's a time and a place for the intellect to be involved, and there's a time and a place for our intellect to get out of the way. And the purpose of the will in our spiritual growth is to help us to decide, to decide that which we would have, what is the good that we would have. There's a good in the universe and I ought to have it. That's a decision of the intellect. But once we get moving on the process, once we get moving, we do our spiritual practice, once we get moving and getting everything aligned and we start our action, then it may be time for the intellect to step aside and to let the spiritual power take over, to let the spiritual unfoldment take over. Another way to say it is maybe the purpose of the will and the intellect is to plant the seed in the ground. But once the seed is there, you don't keep digging it up to see if it's growing. You don't keep mulling it over. You don't keep analyzing it. You don't keep trying to change it. I was working in Washington, D.C. one time, and I had to take the bus from the tubes over to the hotel in Arlington where I was staying. And the bus stopped at the Pentagon. Excuse me. And there was two gentlemen who were working at the Pentagon that week that I was there, who were project managers. They were building new airplanes. One was building a helicopter, and I don't know what the other one was building. But these are the people who come in when a project is commissioned. They come in and they get the whole thing organized, and then they kind of oversee the steps of production and make sure that everybody has the resources that they need and problems are solved and all those kind of things. And they were sitting right behind me on the bus and they were talking, and I knew what they were talking about because I had been in project management. I understood the terminology they were using. And one of them was extremely frustrated because the project had been green lighted and he was starting his project and he was trying to get the project moving. And every time they had a review, somebody would come into the room and say, well, maybe we need to put this project on hold because I just heard there's a new development coming. There's something new that's coming down the road, and maybe we ought to stop this project and wait until this new technology is developed so we can incorporate it into this aircraft that you're building. And of course, if you do that, well, you'll never get it built. You'll be waiting forever and ever and ever because there's always something new coming along. At some point, you have to go ahead and build what you have and then come back in later and modify it. And the one man turned to the other and he says, there comes a point where you just need to get all the engineers out of the room and go ahead and build the aircraft. And what he's talking about is a point where you need to shut the intellect out. The decision's been made. The intellect's done its job. It's decided the good that I will have. And now I need to stop thinking about it. I need to stop mulling it over. I need to stop trying to modify it. I just need to let the rest of the process take over. There's also times when our emotion wants to lead the way. There's a time when it's our feelings that are leading the way. And that's very, very interesting. We have to be able to get in touch with our feelings in order to know that. So our head might be telling us something, but nothing's happening. See, nothing's kind of going along. I keep saying I want to do this. I keep talking about doing this, but something's just not happening. And at that point, I need to stop and listen to my feelings. What is my heart trying to tell me? What's going on here? So our spiritual practice of meditation is perfect for this, because we learn how to get the intellect to quiet down. We learn how to let the monkey mind be still. And then we can feel. We can feel. So maybe our heart is trying to tell us something that our head doesn't quite comprehend, our head doesn't quite understand, But yet it's important for our growth, and we need to go do it. As I said in the email last night, nobody falls in love because it makes perfectly good sense. It's the logical, reasonable, rational thing to do. It's a time when our heart shows us the way. Our heart leads the way, and we have to go, and we have to follow. We have to let the intellect go along for the ride and let the heart lead the way. So we must be able to get in touch with our feelings. We must be able to be quiet and still in our meditation. We must be able to listen, and if we understand then what our heart is telling us to do, even if our intellect is not quite on board, the intellect needs to support it. The intellect needs to adopt it. The intellect needs to surrender and say, okay, I may not know everything there is to know. I may not have all the data that I would love to have. But this is what my heart is telling me to do, and I will trust in it. So therefore, the good that I ought to have is the good that my heart is telling me. And you see now the heart led and the intellect picked up and got on board. And the other thing about our emotions, which is very important, is sometimes the emotions don't want to go. Sometimes there's a negative emotion, if you want to call it a negative emotion, but there's an emotion there that is preventing us from going in the direction that we want to go. Excuse me. So we might be afraid, for example. And we may not even be aware of the fact that we are afraid. But we might be afraid. So our head might be calling us to some grand and glorious adventure. Let's sell everything we have and we'll move to Tibet. And we'll study Buddhism, and we'll raise yaks, and we'll live off of yak milk. And won't it be wonderful? And our heart's going, I ain't going to do that. I don't even know if I can live at that altitude, much less milk a yak. So the head wants to go, but there's something in the heart. There's something in the heart that's afraid. And this is where you get into Susan Jeffers' work, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. The emotions do not listen to the intellect. You have to really get that. Emile Coué said it, when the imagination and the will are in conflict, the imagination will win every time. The emotions do not listen to the intellect. If you've ever dealt with a frightened child, you can tell them until you're blue in the face that there's no reason to be frightened, but that doesn't do any good. They can hear you, they can nod, they can go, with the tears coming down their face, but they're still scared. They're still frightened. And you have to recognize that within each and every one of us is that frightened child at times. So the emotions don't respond to the intellect, but what the emotions respond to is action. This is why we have to act as if. This is why we have to begin. If you start to act as if you are not afraid, the fear will diminish. If you start to act as if you can, you will find that you can. Excuse me. So there comes a time where we have to start moving. We just have to get in play. We just have to get in gear. We just have to go and take the guidance as we come along. So like the people who are cutting open the box of the plastic model and saying, well, we'll figure this out as we go along. There are times when we need to do that as well with our spiritual growth. With where we need to go. We need to jump in. We need to start doing something. There's an old saying that says even God can't steer a parked car. So we can treat for guidance as we are moving. But if we sit and do nothing and treat and treat and treat and there's a block, we need to get moving. We need to start doing something. Because as we start doing something, the guidance comes and the block gets removed. So where this all comes together is there's a fourth dimension. And the fourth dimension is the spiritual dimension. So the intellectual, the emotional, and the physical are aspects of the spiritual. The spiritual is kind of the master dimension, if you want to call it that. And we need to get it together physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually in order to be aligned, to have our spiritual wheel alignment. That's the significance of the number 4 in the Bible, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And the number 0 was an indefinite period of time. It meant for however long it took. So Moses had to go out into the desert. That's into the prayer life. He had to marry the daughter of the high priest. He made his approach to God through love. And he stayed there for 40 years. He stayed there for an indefinite period of time, for as long as it took to get it together, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, for him to go back and do the work that he was called to do. Excuse me. Jesus went off into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, the same exact message. An indefinite period of time until he got it together physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So what we want to remember is, excuse me, whatever good it is that we desire, whether the desire first came to us through the intellect or it was revealed to the intellect through the heart, whatever that good is that our heart desires, that is the love of God calling us to itself in that particular way. That is the love of God saying, come and know me better in this particular way. Move toward me in this particular way. Moses married one of the 7 daughters at the well. The 7 main aspects of God, the 7 daughters. There is some approach to God that is going to be calling to us that is going to be more appealing than all the others. And that is our first step towards God. And it comes to us as desire, the starting point of all achievement. And we say there's a good in the universe and I ought to have it. But we have to recognize that the good that we are seeking is not the material thing. It is the experience of God. The health that I am seeking is the experience of the activity of God in my physical affairs. The prosperity and the supply that I am seeking is the activity of the presence of God in my financial affairs. The loving relationships that I'm seeking is the activity of the presence of God in my human relationships. The fulfillment that I'm seeking is the activity of the presence of God in the things that I do, in my activities in the world. So we recognize our desire then as a spiritual desire, not as a self-serving desire, not as a greedy desire, but as a desire to come to know God in some unique and new and different way for us by responding to this call. We recognize then that whatever it is that we are seeking already exists because there's already some part of God. We engage in our spiritual practice, our meditation, our spiritual mind treatment because we are setting in motion through treatment the power of the universe that answers prayer, the power that responds to us according to our belief. Remember, the purpose of prayer is not to change God. That's not going to happen. But the purpose of prayer is to align ourselves, our head, our hearts, and our actions. It aligns ourselves with the truth that is already there. And the prayer sets in motion the power of the universe that responds to our thought, that then makes the changes within us and within our circumstances. for the unfoldment of the demonstration. So we do our spiritual practice of our meditation to listen to our head, to listen to our heart. We do the spiritual practice of our treatment to set into motion that immutable power. See, we don't have to do it all by ourselves. We use the intellect to get ourselves started. We use willpower to get ourselves started. And then we let the power of prayer, the power of treatment, to do the work. Kind of like rolling the snowball down the hill. We just got to get it started. The law of gravity does the rest. We get our intention started. The law of mind does the rest. We release the treatment. We stop thinking about it. We stop trying to tweak it. We stop trying to dig up the seed to see if it's growing. We release it. We let it go. We expect it to be unfolding. And we act as if, and this is important, you've got to get in motion. You have to start acting as if. Don't be sitting around waiting for it to happen. It is already happening. It is here. It is now. It is already happening. When you go to learn how to drive a car, you can think of yourself as someone who will someday be a driver, but who is right now learning. Or you can think of yourself as a driver who is learning the skills necessary to be a better driver. It is a very, very slight shift of adjustment. But one says, I'm waiting for something to happen. And the other says, it has already happened and it is unfolding right here and right now. So whatever it is that we are doing our treatment for, whatever the good is that we have declared that we shall have, we need to start acting as if. Acting as if. We are in the demonstration. It is unfolding. We need to get ourselves moving. And that way, if there are any emotional blocks, they dissolve by the action. The law of mind works through consciousness and will continue to dissolve whatever needs to be dissolved. But we are cooperating fully by doing everything that we know how to do. We are working with our head, we are working with our heart, we are working with our hands and feet. And most importantly, we are working with our spiritual power of prayer, of treatment. So what we want to recognize then today is that whatever it is that we wish to experience, we may have a different approach for it. We may have come to it through our head. We may have come to it through our heart. Or we may have come to it by starting to take action and then realizing that there was something else, our feedback, realizing there was something else that we needed to know, that we needed to do, that we needed to work on. That we, in fact, really wanted something else, you know. Sometimes we start doing something and say, well, I didn't want that at all. We got the feedback, it's good. However we got started, it doesn't matter. They're all valid points. And in fact, each one has its appropriate use. And if we know that, then we can be very comfortable with starting at any level. We can follow our heart. We can follow our feet. We can follow our intellect. We can sit in our meditation. We can follow our spirit. We can follow our guidance. So I invite us then, let's go forward this week and let's make sure that we cover all the steps on the wheel. Whatever it is that we're working toward, whatever experience of God it is that we wish to have, let's make sure that we're covering all the bases. Doesn't matter which one you start on, make sure you go around, all the way around, and around again, and around again, and around again. Think of our life as an upward spiral. We're going around in a circle, but with every circle we get a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, a little closer to our complete experience of the love of God. So your head, your heart, or your feet, Which do you follow? All of them. And then, wherever you start, expect the others to get in line and go along. And I think this way we will find that our upward path is easier to understand, is easier to execute, is easier to experience, because we are approaching it with our total being. And so it is.